We did not go to Afghanistan to nation build. And it's the right and the responsibility of the Afghan people alone to decide their future and how they want to run their country. So let me ask those who want us to stay, how many thousands more Americans' daughters and sons are you willing to risk? Already we have members of our military whose parents fought in Afghanistan 20 years ago. Would you send their children and their grandchildren as well? Would you send your own son or daughter?
Powerful words from President Biden, who today finds himself on the defensive from all sides of the political divide, defending his decision to withdraw all U.S. forces from Afghanistan, amid warnings from his own generals of the boon this will be for the Taliban, and among criticism from some fellow Democrats that he's not moving quickly enough to protect Afghan interpreters who have risked their lives for many years now to protect and aid the U.S. efforts there. President Biden seemed to declare in the clearest terms to date that the 20-year U.S. effort in Afghanistan was a failure.
I argued from the beginning, as you may recall. It came to light after the administration was over, lasted our administration. No nation has ever unified Afghanistan. No nation. Empires have gone there and not done it.
Of those comments specifically, the New York Times adds this context, that it was a reference to the British occupation of that country in the 19th century and the Soviet effort to gain control there 3 decades ago. The Times adding this, quote, both efforts failed, and Mr. Biden was, in essence, adding the United States to the list. Joining our coverage, Paul Rieckhoff, founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, president of Righteous Media, and the host of the Independent Americans podcast. And Jeremy Bash is here, former chief of staff for the CIA and Department of Defense, and Msnbc national security analyst. Paul Rieckhoff, I start with you. Your reactions.
I think it was a mixed bag. This is a very difficult speech to give. It's a very somber time for our military, for the people of Afghanistan, for our allies. I think overall the message was good. It is time to get out, and the way Biden framed it was important, saying that we had an objective to keep America safe from attack, and we had an objective to kill bin Laden. But at the same time, the way we're getting out feels wrong. It feels like we're washing our hands of this problem. We're getting out as fast as we can. And there's a real concern about this message being too optimistic and too hopeful. The reality is the Taliban's moving through that country fast. It looks bad. A lot of people are going to get slaughtered. We might have a humanitarian disaster on our hands. And our Afghan interpreters are being left to die. And Biden clearly did not have a plan to get them out. They should be somewhere safe already. And only now is he introducing a plan to get them somewhere else without a real plan. Like, he didn't stand up today and say, hey, if you're in Afghanistan, here's the website you go to so you don't get murdered. So there's a real concern, I think, especially in the veterans community, that we're leaving this the wrong way and that the worst may be yet to come.
Jeremy, I think the president is very aware of this criticism that Paul's articulating. It's coming from some members of his own party. Let me show you some of what he said about our efforts now.
We're also going to continue to make sure that we take on the Afghan nationals who work side by side with U.S. forces, including interpreters and translators, since we're no longer going to have military there after this. Our message to those women and men is clear. There is a home for you in the United States, if you so choose, and we will stand with you just as you stood with us.
So, Jeremy, I guess my question is, if the president had made clear that this was his vision, his plan for Afghanistan at the end of the last administration in which he served, why wasn't there a plan to get our interpreters and our friends and people who worked alongside us for those 20 years of war out?
Well, first, Nicole, I think the key that Biden delivered today is he's leveling with the American people, and he's saying our strategy for 20 years now needs to change. It hasn't been a failure because the mission has been to prevent homeland attack emanating from Afghanistan like a 9/11 attack. And we have done that successfully. We've done that across Republican and Democratic administrations. And so to that extent, the mission has been achieved. And now, if we want to retain a robust military presence in the region, in the Middle East, to find, fix, and finish any resurgent al-Qaeda or other terrorist attack threatening our homeland, we will have the capability to do so. But having 2,500 troops on the ground is not going to be the thing that defines whether or not we can protect our homeland, especially given the fact, Nicole, that we have other terrorist threats across the globe in Syria, in Yemen, in Africa. And we have to reposition our forces to deal with that. Now, with respect to the interpreters, I fully agree that the United States needs to have an aggressive plan to get them out as fast as possible. I'm told from people inside the administration that more than 1,000 are coming out every month. That's not fast enough. That we are actively providing resources to them so that they can get to third countries and military bases. But at the end of the day, there are numerous congressional statutes and laws that require intelligence assessments before people can be repatriated here. And the administration is working with Congress to streamline those so that those people can be safely brought to the United States if they want to be here. But I think, again, Nicole, the broader point here is that 2,500 troops in Afghanistan is not going to be the thing that protects our homeland. We have to have an aggressive over-the-horizon military force to do that.
Paul Rieckhoff, you mentioned a lot of emotions. Can you just take us through what those are?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that most of the American public hasn't been tracking on Afghanistan for the last 20 years. We've used the hashtag Forgotistan because the folks who served in uniform and in the foreign policy community feel like we've been at war for 2 decades and the rest of the country has been focused on other things. So there's a real sense of this quickly going in the rearview mirror and a sense of loss, a sense of reckoning, a sense of questioning our own service and our country's commitment, but also questioning if the country is going to commit to what happens next. The military operations might be over, but conflict is not, especially for the Afghan people, for women on the ground, for interpreters. And maybe this interpreter situation just kind of clarifies it, because failing to plan is planning to fail. We're talking to Afghan friends on the ground right now who heard this speech and don't know where to go. And they're hearing from Jen Psaki and others, maybe we're going to send them to Kazakhstan or some other place that violates human rights. They should be in Guam or someplace like it that we can control. There's bipartisan support for an effort to get them to Guam. And that will help us deal with some of the moral injury that many of us are going to face here. But then we've also got to deal with burn pits and toxin exposures, all the after effects that are going to affect almost 1 million men and women who've served over there over the last 2 decades. So there's a real concern that we're being forgotten quickly, and it's starting with forgetting our friends. And maybe those of us who served in uniform are going to be next.
I agree with Paul's points, Nicole, and he makes them very strongly, and I agree, except I just don't see how 2,500 troops on the ground resolves burn pits, resolves the moral issues, resolves protection of interpreters who are across the country. I think those are all things we have to deal with. But the question presented to the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, is, do we keep 2,500 troops in the country, which we've had troops there for 20 years, or do we change our strategy to protect our homeland? And I think President Biden kind of made a gutsy call. He leveled with the American people, and he said, we can protect our homeland, and we can attack al-Qaeda with an over-the-horizon force. And I think that's absolutely critical, because if you look at the recent intelligence assessments from our intelligence community, there was one sentence in the worldwide threat hearing devoted to al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. There are other threats that we have to deal with, and it would be a dereliction of duty. It would violate everything we all stand for and care about if we were in position and posture to deal with those other threats. And I know Paul and the entire community of people who've served in the post-9/11 wars fundamentally agrees with that. We have to protect our homeland at the end of the day.
If I can respond, go ahead, Nicole.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Paul.
No, what we know is this is not simple. It's not one question. That's not the only thing the Commander-in-Chief has got to solve, is whether or not to put troops on the ground. This is a really complex, complicated, rapidly evolving situation. And the worst thing that a president can do is say it's simple and it's going to be over, and this is the chapter ending. There are so many pieces to this, and it's up to him to frame that strategically for the American people. It's up to him to ask the American people for help. And he may be leveling with us about the choices, but I don't think he leveled with us about how bad it can be over there to come. It may not have been our objective to keep peace over there forever, but we've also got to deal with the fact that we could have a real humanitarian disaster on our hands that we were a part of. We can't just wash our hands and say, hey, it's the Afghan army's problem. Now, we have a moral responsibility on that issue, and to deal with issues like Pakistan and plenty of other things that he didn't touch on in his speech. It's not simple, and the worst thing that a president can do is make it sound simple.
It's not simple at all. And for our diplomats and our intelligence professionals who are going to be having to deal with this new relationship with Afghanistan, they're going to have to grapple with all those things. I couldn't agree more. They're going to have to deal with the regional issues. They're going to have to deal with Pakistan. They're going to have to deal with running intelligence networks. They're going to have to deal with fixing, finishing terrorist targets. They're going to have to deal with the humanitarian issues, the refugee problem. There are a number of very complex issues that are coming out of Afghanistan over the coming months and years that are going to face this administration and the next administration and the next administration. No doubt about that. I think the question, though, again, back to the choice that Biden was dealt with, which is, do I keep troops in Afghanistan or do I reposition those troops elsewhere? And I think the smart national security decision was to reposition those troops elsewhere.
Paul, I just want to give you last words. I want to take my own history out of this, acknowledge that I worked for a president whose policies in the region were very polarizing and unpopular, but just ask this as plainly as I can. It's not necessarily troops in or troops out. I mean, we have troops in all sorts of places. We still have troops in Germany. We have troops in, Korea. We have troops all over the place. Was taking all the troops out and leaving women to fall again to violence to the Taliban, leaving our interpreters in the lurch, was that the right decision in your view?
I don't think so. But again, it's not a bifurcated question. It's not either or. The question was, okay, if you're going to pull troops out, then how are you going to keep women safe? How are you going to deal with our interpreters? If we're closing the door, how are you going to provide resources at the VA? You have to look at it holistically and really frame up for the American people that, yes, you're leveling with us about that decision, but also level with us about what's to come. Level with us about the fact that there are going to be veterans facing health impacts for a generation, and that might cost money too. So let's start planting those seeds now, and let's make a commitment to the entire country to understand that, yes, the military component of our commitment there has ended, but our moral commitment remains forever. And that's where the president's really got to be out in front and continue to keep it front and center so America doesn't forget.
It's so important. I'm really grateful to both of you, and we'll ask both of you to stay on this with us, because I agree with you, Paul. The military has borne the brunt of something that vast swaths of the American public has long stopped thinking about on a daily basis. I'm really grateful to both of you for being here on such an important day. Thank you so much. When we return, there's new reporting about how the twice impeached ex-president is grifting taxpayers now for his own protection. It involves the Secret Service, and that story is next.